COVID-19 has strained state transportation budgets. My next guest has introduced legislation that will create new construction jobs, provide a much-needed cash infusion, and ensure state highway projects continue as planned. Congressman Rodney Davis, the ranking member of the House Subcommittee on Highways and Transit. It's not like we haven't talked before, but the needle keeps moving on what we're talking about. Congressman Davis, great to see you. You just heard Jay Timmons of NAM kind of lay out a lot of the stress points that are out there, and I imagine you're aligned that we need to do stuff. But what I had found unusual about the on-ramp you're coming onto this is you're really worried about budgets now and the collapse of revenue to states. What's that picture look like?
Well, it looks tough. I mean, you got to remember, transportation dollars, either from the federal gas tax or state revenue sources, it's down because of the pandemic. And there's one thing I think we can do in Washington. That's to require our states to put less of a match up front, so that they could take their local dollars and use them on more localized projects. If there's any time in our nation's history that the federal government ought to let the states spend their state dollars on non-federal projects and have 100% of our federal gas tax dollars go to projects in their state, it's now during the pandemic, which is why I introduced our Highway Relief Act.
And where does it stand now, Rod? Because, you know, as Jay Timmons just pointed out to everyone, we've run very large deficits right now, but there's a big pandemic that's knocking everybody in the gut. Are you finding folks understanding your logic right now, or is it a tough slog?
Well, a couple things. First off, I'm going to have to apologize. I think my dog behind me has noticed a bird outside and is beginning to think about barking. So if you hear that, forgive me, Steve. But it's always good to follow my good friend Jay Timmons, because he lays out the need for infrastructure investment so well every time I hear him talk. And the unfortunate aspect of where we are, because of the pandemic, because of the speaker instituting and implementing proxy voting, the opportunities for somebody like me, who's ranked the 13th most bipartisan member of the House, the opportunities for me to talk about good priorities like this and get it into maybe the next round of stimulus talks or COVID relief talks, or to put it on a standalone bill, has been diminished. And that's not good for how our country should govern. But I'm optimistic that once we get through this election, we come back in the lame duck session, that it's good common sense policies like this, that politics will frankly be pushed aside, and this will be pushed through.
You know, let me ask you a question that is sort of a meta question, sort of a, you know, Steve Clemons, Rodney Davis, you know, beer at the bar kind of question. When we talk about this, and I look at some of the stuff that you're dealing with, you know, waterways, highways, railways, aviation systems, as big as they all are and as big as the demand that they represent, I also feel like we're on the edge of so many major technological revolutions, the Internet of Things, the way we process big data, sensors everywhere. And what I'm wondering is, as we think about this, are we siloed in the wrong ways? Are we able to have a conversation that begins to talk about waterways? I'm going to be interviewing Representative Sam Graves later, and he's interested in barges on the Missouri River. Well, barges on the Missouri River are also a function of data, connections, communications, and I'm just wondering if that permeates. Am I wrong that it's already that way when we discuss it, or do we have a problem in how we conceptualize and talk and think about infrastructure?
That's a great way to put it, Steve. I completely agree with you. We do have a problem. Everything's so siloed out. And the opportunity to break through those silos could have happened at the beginning of this administration, when if we could have come together in a bipartisan way to address a major infrastructure package similar to ones that Jay and you were discussing in the segment before, I think it could have broken those silos open. But instead, it's because of partisan politics and polarization that people are even more siloed off when it comes to infrastructure. And even those silos are becoming partisan, as we saw with the highway reauthorization becoming a partisan bill for the first time in my congressional career. And it's disappointing. But in the end, we have to have those who are interested in good public policy willing to come together and say, we'll take a large package or we'll do individual packages. But we've got to see progress. And this is where I got to give the administration some credit. You mentioned waterways. I represent the Illinois and Mississippi rivers, and our ability to get products out into the global marketplace depends upon our locks and dams. And it took this administration to finally invest in upgrading the locks and dams along the Illinois-Mississippi River. We heard a lot of talk about it in previous administrations, but no investment. Now we've got an upgrade on LaGrange Lock and Dam. It's open. The Corps did a great job. Got to give them credit. Now let's move on to some others.
Rod, how do we compare against other big countries in the world, and does that matter? I was a few years back in Seattle, and they built the largest pontoon floating bridge in the world, replacing one before, between Bellevue and Washington. Microsoft was all over it trying to help get it in. But what occurred to me is I learned that bridge took 15 years from conceptualization to when it opened up, and I was there, and $8 billion. And in China, it feels like they're doing one of those every 2 weeks. Is there? It does. I don't mean, maybe, I'll admit to the viewers, I may have that wrong in terms of every 2 weeks. Let's say every 3 weeks. But my point is that a problem for this country that we seem to be going so slowly with the money, with the building, with the development, and I just don't get it.
I don't get it either, which is why, in my career, I've been leading the charge to reduce the regulatory environment. We can protect our environment. We can make sure that studies are done, but let's not stop progress. And that example you just gave in Seattle is a prime example of why we've introduced the One Federal Decision Act. It's a bill that would continue to reduce the regulatory burden and get us from what I consider the paperwork stages of projects to laying concrete, or in that case, building that bridge, getting to construction and investment so that our tax dollars go to something that the American taxpayers can see rather than just sitting behind a desk or a computer screen doing paperwork and endless studies. That's got to change. And we've had bipartisan cooperation in the past in reducing the regulatory environment. Remember, a Corps of Engineers project, until Chairman Schuster and our Transportation Committee a few years ago passed a long-term WRDA bill, it took an average of 15 years to get from the design and engineering, the paperwork stage, to construction on any Corps project. That's unacceptable. Now, by law, we require those studies to be done in 3 years. But we can still do more, which is why the One Federal Decision Act needs to be passed.
Rod, the word infrastructure excites me, but most everyone else in the world, their eyes glaze over. Just want to be honest, maybe you like the word too. And I want to ask you a political question, because we're in the political season. President Trump, talked about infrastructure, bigly 3.5 years ago. It's kind of come up again. President Obama, talked about it. My view, we didn't do enough during the TARP relief in this area, but I know that's a debatable point. But my point is, this issue has been hanging around a lot. But if you go break it down and you talk to Americans about it, it ranks a lot higher on their priority list of concerns than foreign policy. And I'm a foreign policy guy. I want that to be higher. What can we do? Jay Timmons just made this really key point. He says, we've just shown what we can do in COVID when that's a national priority up there. Infrastructure was a priority before. How, when COVID is dealt with and over, do we not lose sight of the significance of infrastructure? Do you have any insight to that, given the fact that you're running for office, you're running for re-election like in 5 days? How do you talk to people about infrastructure so that they maintain, that fire for it?
Well, in my own personal case, I talk to people about the investments that we've made at the federal level on major infrastructure projects. I go to my communities and I can point out the successes that we've had advocating with this administration for investments into our communities on rail projects, road projects, mass transit projects. They're all success stories to show my constituents and show the American people that in spite of the hyperpolarization that in this environment we live in, we are still doing good things when it comes to infrastructure investment. But you're right, Steve, we've got to do more. And the only way to do more is to get politics out of infrastructure once again. Unfortunately, that's what killed any long-term infrastructure bill that we could have passed to address our crumbling roads and bridges. And it also killed any, large infrastructure package coming from the administration just over the last 4 years. Nothing but politics.
Congressman, we're taking questions from the audience, and we've got a tough one for you from Claire. Claire?
Hi, my name's Claire August. I'm the Manager of Congressional Affairs at the Solar Energy Industries Association in Washington, D.C. Our electric grid has an opportunity to be cleaner, safer, and more resilient. I'd like to know, what investments in infrastructure would you like to see in the electricity sector so that American manufacturers, small businesses, and families can more easily take advantage of renewable energy?
Great question.
It's a great question, Claire. And I'm a supporter of an all-of-the-above approach. Wind and solar play an important role in America's already success in reducing our carbon footprint. But we all realize that we can't run the American economy on renewable energy sources alone. And we've got to continue to invest in baseload generating capacity. That means nuclear facilities. You know, a lot of folks don't realize nuclear facilities like the one in my district in Clinton, Illinois, they have zero emissions. We need baseload generators that can continue to reduce our carbon footprint, but keep America economically competitive and alive on the world and global marketplace. And that's an issue that I think we all can agree on when it comes to an all-of-the-above approach. And I would love to be able to incentivize and continue to invest in all sources of energy with a plan to continue the successful reduction that America is leading the world in when it comes to carbon emissions.
Well, Congressman Rod Davis, I know my people were talking to you earlier, and I heard you had some questions for me, but I know we're out of time. So sorry we didn't hear from your dog as well, but Rod Davis, Congressman from Illinois, good. I know you've got a lot on your plate right now with the election around the corner, but thanks so much for cutting out some time for us, because I know this is a priority for you.
It really is, Steve, and it's great to be with you again. Great to see you, and can't wait to see you again in D.C. when we get back.
Take care, my friend. Thank you so much.